wind screamed across the desert that night, carrying with it the icy breath of an early winter storm. In the small wooden cabin on the edge of Arizona territory, Ethan Cole, former gunslinger turned drifter, sat by the dying fire, rubbing his hands for warmth. The logs hissed, throwing faint orange light across the room. Outside, snow began to fall, rare and silent over the wasteland. He had spent the day chasing strayed cattle and had nearly frozen on the trail. All he wanted now was sleep, alone, quiet, far from the noise of the past. But fate had other plans. The door creaked open just as he began to drift off. Instinct made his hand go to the revolver by his bed. But instead of a raider or thief, a small figure stepped into the room wrapped in a torn wool blanket. The firelight caught the shape of a woman, her skin copper-toned, her long hair matted with snow. She trembled violently, her breath ragged from the cold. Ethan stood quickly, startled. "Ma'am, you lost?" he asked, voice low but firm. She didn't answer, just shut the door behind her and leaned against it, shivering so hard she could barely stand. He moved closer, noticing the frost on her hair, the cuts on her feet. "You'll freeze like that," he muttered, grabbing another blanket from the cot. She didn't resist when he wrapped it around her shoulders. Beneath the blanket, her traditional Apache dress was soaked through. Her lips were blue. "You need to get near the fire," he said, guiding her gently. She looked at him wide-eyed and whispered something in broken English. "No fire. Men follow." His pulse quickened. Someone had been chasing her through the storm. He glanced toward the window, but the night outside was a blur of white. After a moment, he moved back to the fire anyway, stoking it higher. "If they're out there, cold'll kill them before they find you," he said. She sat quietly, eyes following him. He offered her coffee, but she shook her head. Instead, she whispered her name, Tala. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with the proud, sharp beauty of her people. He could see she wasn't used to asking for help. She looked like someone who had been hunted and had run far too long. When she finally spoke again, her voice trembled. "Bad men, soldiers, took my horse, burned my camp." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough of the army's cruelty in his time to believe her without question. "You're safe here," he said softly. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you." But the cold was biting through the cabin walls. He added wood to the fire, though he had little left for the night. She sat closer, hugging herself under the blanket. Her teeth chattered and her body shook from exhaustion. He turned his back to give her space, pretending to tidy his gear. But when the fire died lower again, the cabin grew frigid, and he could hear her soft gasps of pain. When he turned, she was gone from the fireside. Confused, he looked toward the bed and froze. She was there, curled up beneath his blanket, trembling violently. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. Her eyes met his, wide but unashamed. "Cold," she whispered. "Please." He swallowed hard, torn between propriety and compassion. Outside, the wind howled and frost crawled up the windows. He sighed deeply, knowing the desert could be merciless. "All right," he said quietly, pulling another blanket from the trunk. "But you stay covered, understand?" She nodded once, eyes softening. He lay down, careful to keep space between them. Hours passed. The cabin creaked under the storm's weight. Ethan tried to sleep, but the warmth beside him made that impossible. He could feel her shivering lessen as she edged closer, seeking heat. Her hair brushed his shoulder, smelling faintly of sage and smoke. When he opened his eyes, the fire had burned low, shadows flickering across her face. For a moment, he saw her not as a stranger, but as someone fragile, human, caught in a world just as cruel to her as it had been to him. He turned away, trying to steady the rhythm of his breath, but his heart wouldn't calm. Near dawn, he woke to silence. The storm had passed, and pale light filtered through the window. The warmth beside him had shifted. She was sitting up, wrapped in the blanket, watching him. But her expression was different now. Calm, certain. "You saved me," she said simply. He rubbed his eyes, unsure how to answer. "You'd have done the same," he muttered. She shook her head. "No, you risked." Then she reached into her dress and pulled out a small carved amulet, a bear tooth tied with sinew. She placed it in his palm. "You good man. Spirit of bear protect you." He tried to hand it back. "Keep it, you'll need it more." But she refused. "No, debt now. My life with yours." The words made his chest tighten. "You don't owe me a damn thing," he said quietly. "You just stay alive, that's enough." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Her eyes carried a depth that made him uneasy, gratitude mixed with something else he couldn't name. Then she rose, pulling his coat around her shoulders. "I go, soldiers still near," she whispered. He followed her to the door. The sky outside was pink over the mountains, pure and silent after the storm. Before stepping out, she turned back to him. "If I live," she said softly, "I come back." He didn't know what to say, so he only nodded. She smiled faintly, then disappeared into the pale morning. For days he thought of her, wondering if she'd survived. He tried to bury himself in work, repairing fences, fixing his rifle, pretending she had been just a passing dream. But at night, when the fire burned low, he'd glance at the bed where she had lain, and the memory of her warmth haunted him. He tried to tell himself it meant nothing, but it did. Weeks later, a gunshot shattered the quiet evening. Ethan ran outside, rifle in hand, and found a wounded horse limping toward his barn. On its back, barely conscious, was Tala. Her shoulder was bleeding, her face pale. He caught her before she fell. "They found you?" he whispered urgently. She nodded weakly, clutching his shirt. "Soldiers. Took everything. I ran." He carried her inside, laying her on his bed. This time there was no hesitation. He cleaned her wound, stitched it, and stayed awake all night, holding her hand as she burned with fever. By morning she was still alive. When her eyes opened, she looked at him with a quiet peace. "You should have let me die," she whispered. "Stop saying that," he growled softly. "You don't die here. Not while I'm breathing." She smiled faintly. "Then we both stay alive." Days passed, and she grew stronger. The cabin felt warmer with her there, filled with soft murmurs and laughter. She taught him Apache words. He showed her how to mend boots, and one night, under the same roof where she had once crept for warmth, she looked at him and said, "Now your heart warm too." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached out, brushing her hair back. For the first time in years, he felt something more than duty, something like home. Outside, coyotes called under the moonlight. She leaned her head on his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her. They said nothing. There were no promises, no laws between them, just two souls that had survived the same storm. The wind no longer howled through the desert. It whispered, and somewhere in that whisper was the truth he had finally learned. Sometimes a man doesn't find love. Sometimes love finds him in the coldest night imaginable.